think Twitter is one of the things that we all, whether you're a journalist or working in the media or on the business side or anything, it's clearly something you should be doing. It's a conversation we're always having. You should have to do it. Everyone knows you have to do it, but no one really tells you how to do it well. There's no real set of rules on that. People say use hashtags or, but I think it's a little bit more complicated. So I thought that's kind of the goal of today, is to get at how these guys got so good at it, and maybe how you guys can get better at it. So first thing I want to talk about, I think, is that first topic, which is why, if you do work in the media, it's important to be on it. I think from a career perspective, just anecdotally, I've seen so many people gain stature so quickly through Twitter, journalists. So maybe if anyone can jump in and talk about why they think it's important to be on it. To that end.
We refuse. Well, I mean, for me personally, I use Twitter, socially a lot. I mean, I do work in a number of industries, so it's sort of convenient in terms of not having to stick to one topic. And I don't have a blog because I'm expensive, and so the Twitter is kind of useful in terms of talking to different sort of groups of people at the same time, and just not publicizing everything that you're working on at all times, but just sort of getting your showing your affiliations. These are the people who I ride with, and these are the industries that I sort of work in. I mean, it's just a quick and handy CV, I think, in terms of who you're adding, who you're talking to throughout the day, all that stuff.
I'd say for me, first and foremost, it's the best news resource I've ever seen. In that, if you think about it, you can basically bring any writer, any publication, any actor, any artist into your world, into your inbox. So even before you think of what can it do for you externally, think of what it can do for you internally, in that in one very easy package, I can get the BBC, The Economist, The New York Times, and any journalist in this country who I respect and want to read coming to me. I don't have to search them out on the web. It saves me a ton of time. And then when it comes to, you're correct, there's really no, I think, perfect Twitter style, but I would say everybody in this room really should be in the space, because ultimately you have to be where your colleagues are. Mm-hmm. And certainly the one thing that Twitter has done really well, and maybe it's even co-opted it, is the media has really jumped on board. And so if you are part of any media organization, I think you have to be in the space, even if you don't tweet. I think you should be following stuff. Yesterday, in preparation for this, I was in Twitter, and I saw the New York Times has a list of all their reporters on Twitter, and it's grown to 479. So think about that, 479 people. And you could actually subscribe to a Twitter list that just has New York Times reporters, which is actually pretty fascinating. I would recommend. So to me, the big, larger overall is, I think you just have to be in the space where your competitors and where your colleagues are.
Actually, that brings up a really good point, because the New York Times historically is a little bit, a bunch of media institutions are not that visible in terms of what their masthead is, and what the hierarchy is, and what the departments are. So it's kind of a handy way to sort of delineate all those sort of cabals of people and sort of suss out what people's beats are. And it's really, really clear, and it's totally transparent, and that's sort of nice.
And I think also, just in terms of the actual work of doing journalism, it's an awesome way to just reach people who would otherwise be unreachable. If you are reporting in any field where people use Twitter, it's a lot of times the easiest way to reach them, because they're on all day. They're less, I think, guarded on Twitter, because it's kind of a public forum. And so just being on there and being comfortable with it, if somebody gets a message from you on Twitter and you're just this kind of, ghost on Twitter, they're going to be less likely to respond to you, I think, as a journalist, if they don't see that you are, active and a real person on the site.
Yeah, because you want people to be able to sort of co-sign for you. If you're an unknown, but your friends sort of vouch for you, or your crew or whatever, it's sort of nice. That's why being on Twitter is great, but also sort of having some followers. You don't necessarily need to have a lot, but you don't want an egg Avi, 0 followers, because then you'll just look like a twit bot. And it's also really creepy if you're a real person and you're following hundreds of people, but nobody's following you, that's also really weird. So yeah, I mean, just like, definitely just,
Right.
you know, you want to talk to your regular friends there anyway. So just like, you know, get all your friends who are already on Twitter, start with them, and then grow from there.
I think Mary's observation struck me as very astute, this idea of the team. And I think that when you're thinking about professional organizations that are aimed at, when you think, you know, why do we start organizations of, for example, Asian Americans, partly it's anxiety concerning the idea of a bamboo ceiling. So then it's kind of partly thinking through how do people advance? How do you form alliances? And so I think that actually Twitter is a very rich illustration of that happening in real time. It's sort of basically seeing the way that certain ideas and themes are echoed and the way they diffuse. There was a recent conversation kind of with a few people who are kind of very effective and popular diffusers of ideas, and they were talking about how do you attribute things. But in a way, when you're, you know, different people have different objectives. So if you're trying to spread an idea, you might not care about attribution quite as much, because in a way you want people to take ownership of the idea and propagate it very far and wide. But if you're a journalist, you might have a professional interest in saying, wait a second, I mixed my labor with this thing that I found somewhere, this idea that I found, and so I want you to attribute it to me. And the thing is that actually people with a bigger audience, they have tremendous power because they can actually take your idea, obscure person, and then be the person who propagates it and actually claim ownership of it. So actually, in a way, there's almost a defensive orientation, because as Richard says, if so much of the diffusion of ideas is actually happening in this terrain, for you to actually concede that, for you to be a generous colleague, a person generous of spirit who's constantly sharing ideas, remixing ideas, etc., yet you're actually not in that terrain, in that space, taking ownership in that way, you know, that's a perfectly fine thing. There are a lot of different strategies one pursues, and the thing is that that's something that actually really rewards a particular kind of extroverted personality. But I think that, you know, kind of thinking about it in terms of teams and kind of having an impact and taking ownership of some of these ideas in terms of how they're propagated, etc., is one way to think about it. If you're not there, you're actually vulnerable.
I want to, going to that point about affiliations that I was bringing up, you know, it's a way of showing the people you know people, that you're part of a team, that you belong to a workforce, that people interact with you. You know, from a hiring perspective, I feel, you know, recently I've been hiring interns, as a lot of you guys have. And the first thing you do is you Google them, and if they have a Twitter page, you click on it. And one of the things, it's so difficult when you're hiring to make, you know, you can look at a person's CV, whether they're in media, you can look at their clips, whether they're on the business side, you can look at things they've done. But being able to see that they're a social person, that they're interacting with other social people is so huge in making hiring decisions, in having people on your radar, and just, in my mind, going back to like, why do you do it from a career perspective? It's your way of showing future employers or future recruiters that you are out there, that you are a social person. And frankly, it's a little bit alarming in some situations when people don't have a Twitter, when people aren't on the internet. You know, it's
gross and it's weird. I hate it.
Horrible. No, it's a red flag though, right?
No, totally.
It's a red flag.
Especially if it is a hire, because in a situation like that, you know, you already know who your team is. You already know that you're bringing this person in. You know how much time you're going to spend with this person. And I think that, like, when they have no footprint whatsoever, I mean, and they're born in like 85, it's just kind of like you are a skin-wearing face eater. Like,
Well, I mean, I just want to say that that seems incredibly unfair to me, and I think that it's also true.
He's born before
Well, but it's
no, but that's just what.
but I think that you make a very good point. I think that it's simultaneously true and also deeply unfair, and you just deal with the fact that it's deeply unfair, and you move on, and that is indeed how people will read and
Yeah,
recognize
it's like
you.
saying that like tall people, it's like, oh, they suck, they're so tall.
But
Like it's just like, yeah, that's.
No,
just the way
I
it
think
is
you're
now,
totally
yeah.
right, and I'm actually not. I'm certainly not taking.
No,
You know, but
yeah.
it's just, and I think that that's something that's really unfortunate. This technology that is relatively new, we are now all expected to use it.
beholden to it,
And
right,
so anyone who feels like that's crazy and unfair, you are totally correct. But then you just kind of move on from there.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like just you kind of take in the fact that, gosh, this is totally arbitrary. It rewards people with a certain set of skills that not everyone has. But then, the landscape has changed.